What happens to an idea when it is too large for its own time? History is often told as a steady march forward. One discovery builds upon another, each generation adding a brick to an ever-rising structure of knowledge. But beneath that clean narrative lies a quieter truth. Some ideas arrive early, misunderstood, or inconvenient. Others emerge brightly, only to fade, not because they were disproven, but because the world was not ready to hold them. This story begins in those shadowed margins. Picture a dimly lit workshop at the edge of a growing city. The air smells of oil, paper, and ozone. A man stands alone, listening, not to voices, but to patterns, vibrations, currents, the invisible movements beneath ordinary life. He believes the universe is more generous than we assume, more alive with possibility. What he cannot know is whether history will remember him as a pioneer or forget him entirely. Across centuries, similar rooms appear. A basement laboratory, a desert testing ground, a shed behind a home built by hand. In each, someone is asking a dangerous question. What if our understanding of energy, matter, or life itself is incomplete? This narrative is not about secret villains or hidden masters pulling strings behind the curtain. That version of history is too simple, too theatrical. The truth, when it exists at all, is usually quieter and more human. Institutions resist disruption. Markets protect stability. Cultures defend what feels familiar. And sometimes extraordinary ideas dissolve not through malice, but through indifference, fear, or exhaustion. The stories you are about to hear occupy a fragile space between record and rumor, between documented experimentation and contested memory. Some are grounded in patents and photographs. Others survive only through testimony, fragments, or second-hand accounts. All have been reshaped by time. What unites them is not proof of a single hidden agenda, but a recurring tension, the uneasy relationship between imagination and acceptance. Consider how often breakthroughs challenge more than technology. They unsettle economics, labor, medicine, even identity. An invention that promises abundance questions systems built around scarcity. A cure redefines an industry shaped around treatment. A new way of moving through space unsettles borders, defenses, and distance itself. When ideas collide with the world, it is rarely a fair contest. This documentary journey explores 10 inventions and discoveries that once hovered at the edge of possibility. Some were abandoned. Some were suppressed. Some simply vanished when their creators did. Rather than asking whether each claim was true or false, we ask something more enduring. Why do certain ideas disappear, and what does that say about us? Memory, after all, is selective. Archives are incomplete. Progress is edited. In the early 20th century, a belief flourished that science could unlock limitless energy, heal the body without harm, and harmonize human systems with nature itself. That optimism now feels distant, almost naive, yet traces of it remain, faint signals still echoing through footnotes, confiscated notebooks, and unanswered questions. As listeners, we are not jurors, we are witnesses to possibility. This series invites you to step into that uncertainty, to listen without rushing to judgment, to sit with ambiguity, to imagine what it means that human curiosity repeatedly reaches beyond what society is prepared to support. Perhaps some of these inventions were flawed. Perhaps some worked only in limited ways. Perhaps others were misunderstood entirely. But each reflects a moment when someone dared to think differently and paid a price for it. In the chapters ahead, we will move slowly, from energy to medicine, from gravity to sound, from matter to memory. Each story will open with an image, a place, or a moment suspended in time. And at the end of each, we will ask not what was lost, but what remains possible. Because history is not just what happened, it is also what almost happened. It started with a tower, tall, skeletal, and strange, rising over the coastline of Long Island like a tuning fork left behind by the gods. In 1901, Nikola Tesla stood beside the unfinished Wardenclyffe Tower, gazing toward the Atlantic horizon. He wasn't trying to light a single bulb. He wanted to electrify the Earth itself. Tesla believed energy was everywhere, in the air, the ground, the space between stars. His dream wasn't merely to transmit power without wires. He envisioned a world where anyone, anywhere, could access electricity the way we breathe air. No cables, no coal, no gatekeepers, just resonance. And it worked, at least briefly. Witnesses described strange occurrences, light bulbs glowing in open fields, motors running with no cords, heat systems activated by devices that seemed to drink from the sky. Tesla called it radiant energy. He had tapped into something fundamental, something alive in the very fabric of the Earth. With the right frequency, he claimed, the whole planet could become a conductor. Energy could be free, but not everyone saw promise. Others saw peril. J.P. Morgan, who had financed the tower's construction, withdrew his support abruptly. The math was simple. If people could access power without paying for it, where would the profits come from? If anyone can draw on the power, Morgan reportedly asked, where do we put the meter? The tower was shut down, then demolished, its foundations buried. Tesla's notes vanished into government archives. When he died in 1943, federal agents raided his residence and confiscated trunks of documents. His work was deemed a matter of national security. And just like that, the dream of free global energy flickered out. But what truly disappeared? Tesla's theories, once considered fringe, echo faintly in modern experiments with wireless transmission, zero-point energy, and atmospheric electricity. Independent researchers still chase the ghost of Wardenclyffe. Some claim brief sparks of success. Most meet silence or resistance. The story of Tesla's tower is not just about a machine. It's about a moment when technology outpaced economics, when imagination exceeded what society was ready to allow, and when the idea of shared abundance collided with the machinery of control. What would the world look like if energy were as free as sunlight? Would cities bloom in deserts? Would wars for oil lose their meaning? Would the shape of civilization bend towards something more humane? Or would new systems of control simply replace the old? Tesla's tower never fulfilled its promise, but the questions it raised still hum quietly in the wires around us. Not everything lost is forgotten. Some ideas remain suspended, like a signal searching for resonance, waiting for the world to tune in. It began with a lens, unlike any the world had seen. In a small California lab in the 1930s, Dr. Royal Raymond Rife adjusted the dials on his invention, a microscope capable of magnifying 60,000 times, powerful enough to observe living viruses in real time. But what he found was not just a better view, it was a key. Rife believed that every disease-causing organism vibrated at its own unique frequency. If you could match it precisely, you could destroy it. Not with drugs, not with knives, but with light, vibration, resonance. He built a frequency generator, and he began to test it. The theory was radical, but the results, according to those who witnessed them, were astonishing. In 1934, a clinical trial treated 16 terminal cancer patients using Rife's frequency therapy. 14 were reportedly cured within weeks. The remaining 2 improved and later recovered. A 100% success rate. There should have been headlines, awards, a new chapter in medicine, but there was only silence. Before the findings could be published, the lead researcher died suddenly. The documents vanished. Journals refused to publish Rife's work. Colleagues distanced themselves. His lab was raided, equipment confiscated, patents buried. Rife was accused of fraud, stripped of credibility. The man who may have held a non-invasive cure for cancer died in obscurity, his machines dismantled, his name largely forgotten. Why? The answer may lie not in science, but in structure. By the 1940s, cancer treatment had become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Hospitals, pharmaceuticals, equipment. A machine that used targeted frequencies, costing little, offering no patentable drug, threatened that system. Medicine, like energy, had found its profit model, and disruptive simplicity was unwelcome. Today, Rife's devices are classified as pseudoscience. And yet, scattered around the edges of mainstream medicine, remnants of his theory persist. Frequency therapies, bioresonance devices, light-based treatments, most are dismissed. Some are quietly researched. A few show promise. What if Rife wasn't wrong? What if healing could be a matter of harmonizing the body's rhythms rather than disrupting them? And what does it say about us? That we may have once glimpsed a gentler form of medicine, only to turn away. Science is supposed to follow evidence, but institutions follow momentum. And sometimes the two diverge. Rife's lens gave us a way to see the invisible. His frequencies perhaps gave us a way to listen to it. What remains is not certainty, but a haunting possibility that the cure was here, and we weren't ready to believe in it. It started with a strange drift, an object all sliding across a lab bench with no push, no pull, no sound. In 1928, a young physicist named Thomas Townsend Brown began experimenting with high-voltage capacitors. What he observed defied explanation. When charged, these devices moved, not through magnetism, not through heat or pressure, but through something else, something unseen. Brown called it electrogravitics. He believed he had discovered a bridge between electricity and gravity. By applying a strong electric field across a special type of capacitor, he could generate thrust. No propellant, no combustion, just force, arising from the field itself. It was, in effect, an anti-gravity engine. Throughout the 1950s, Brown conducted public and military demonstrations. Disc-shaped devices lifted off the ground, circled in controlled paths, and returned, all powered by electricity alone. No rotors, no wings, no jet, just silence and lift. Military interest surged. Secret projects were launched. Winter Haven, Project Y. Defense agencies saw what Brown's technology could mean. Silent aircraft, infinite hovering, propulsion without fuel. The promise of a new kind of mobility, one that ignored the rules of thrust and drag. And then, just as suddenly, everything went quiet. By 1956, Brown's work was classified. His patents were seized. His equipment vanished. Officially, the research had failed, but whispers persisted. Aerospace firms were allegedly experimenting with similar propulsion systems. Some aviation magazines even speculated that electrogravitics had gone black, absorbed into classified military programs. The world moved on. Rockets rose, jets advanced, and Brown, the man who might have unseated them all, was silenced. What happened? Perhaps it was military secrecy, too valuable to share, too disruptive to release. Perhaps it was scientific orthodoxy, reluctant to accept a theory that bent gravity through voltage. Or perhaps it was something simpler, a fear of opening doors we do not understand. If gravity can be manipulated, what else can be? Brown died in 1985, still barred from speaking freely about his discoveries. The public narrative reduced him to a fringe figure, his achievements lost beneath layers of disbelief. Yet the idea refuses to fade. In recent years, interest in electrogravitics has resurfaced. Independent researchers, engineers, even some defense insiders whisper of inertial manipulation, field propulsion, and exotic craft. Nothing confirmed, nothing denied, just a lingering question. What if the laws we know are not the only ones? And what if we once stood at the edge of a new era of movement, only to look down, afraid to leap? Brown's flying discs didn't just challenge physics, they challenged control. And sometimes, the future is postponed not because it's impossible, but because it's unstoppable. Imagine a man standing in a room filled with sound. Not music, not speech, but pure tone. Harmonics, resonance, invisible waves vibrating through air and steel. In 1872, John Ernst Worrell Keely claimed he had found a way to harness that sound, not for communication, but for power. He called it sympathetic vibration. His invention, the Keely motor, was unlike any other. It used no fuel, no steam, no electricity, only carefully tuned acoustic vibrations. With tuning forks, pipes, and resonators, Keely demonstrated machines lifting massive weights, driving pistons, and spinning wheels, all powered by what he described as the vibrational ether that fills all matter. To observers, it was magic. In Philadelphia, Keely hosted public demonstrations where heavy industrial equipment sprang to life from the hum of a musical tone. No wires, no engines, just sound unlocking motion. Investors lined up. A company was formed. Newspapers hailed a new age of power. But beneath the enthusiasm, unease was growing. Keely refused to fully disclose how the motor worked. He claimed the science was too far ahead of its time, that humanity wasn't ready. As years passed and commercial production failed to materialize, skepticism mounted. Was it a hoax, or was the truth too disruptive? By the 1880s, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, powered by coal, steam, and oil. Entire fortunes depended on those fuels. A motor that ran on sound, on air, on nothing? That was not just a curiosity, it was a threat. When investors demanded control, Keely resisted. When rivals accused him of fraud, he stood his ground. But after his death in 1898, investigations into his lab found strange contraptions, some of which seemed to support the critics' claims of deception. Compressed air tubes, hidden reservoirs. Others suggested something more mysterious, designs that hinted at harmonic principles later explored in quantum mechanics. Today, Keely's reputation sits in ambiguity. Some label him a charlatan. Others, a misunderstood genius, working with concepts a century ahead of his time. Modern researchers experimenting with acoustic energy have found hints that vibrations can indeed affect matter in unexpected ways, extracting small amounts of energy, shifting molecular structures, even levitating objects under specific conditions. But no one has rebuilt what Keely showed. His notes are fragmented, his theories written in metaphors. He spoke of etheric force, of vibratory sympathy, in language more poetic than scientific. Perhaps that was the only way he could express what he saw. What remains is a question. Can the universe be played like an instrument? And if it can, if vibration itself holds the key to energy, what does it mean that we turned instead to fire and smoke? Keely's motor may never be fully understood, but the silence it left behind still hums with possibility. Sometimes, what we call noise is simply a signal we've forgotten how to hear. A piece of metal rises slowly into the air. No strings, no magnets, no sound. In the late 1970s, inside a cluttered apartment in Vancouver, Canada, a man named John Hutchison created a series of effects that defied conventional physics. Objects levitated, fused, vibrated, and transformed. Not by combustion or mechanical force, but through fields, electromagnetic storms he conjured from a chaotic orchestra of Tesla coils, Van de Graaff generators, and radio frequency equipment. He called it the Hutchison effect. The first levitation happened by accident. Hutchison had been replicating Nikola Tesla's experiments when he noticed a bar of metal trembling, then lifting. He added more energy, adjusted the frequencies, and watched as aluminum twisted like rubber, wood fused with metal, and glass vibrated into powder. He filmed it. Scientists, military observers, even skeptics came to see. Some left puzzled, others alarmed. The Canadian military showed interest. So did the United States. Hutchison's equipment was eventually seized. He was warned to stop. His lab dismantled. The official explanation? Anomalies, inconsistencies, unreliable replication. But the footage remained. On grainy video, objects hang suspended in air, spinning, trembling. Steel bars bend without heat. Composites form without pressure. Hutchison claimed it was all due to overlapping electromagnetic fields, creating localized pockets where the known laws of physics broke down. Was it a hoax? Misinterpreted data? Or something deeper? Independent researchers have tried, with mixed results, to recreate the effect. Some have seen small anomalies, levitation, deformation, unusual heat signatures. Others report nothing at all. Mainstream science dismisses it as pseudoscience. But the question lingers. What if matter isn't as stable as we think? What if, under certain conditions, energy can rearrange reality, bending gravity, altering structure, changing form? In the decades since, whispers of similar research have surfaced in classified aerospace programs, experimental propulsion systems, materials behaving oddly under extreme electromagnetic stress. Nothing confirmed, nothing shared. For Hutchison, the effect was never about military power. It was about wonder, about curiosity without agenda. A reminder that even in our modern age, the universe can still surprise us. And yet, surprise is not always welcome. His experiments suggested a world not built on immovable laws, but on interactions, fields, patterns, conditions. A world where the right combination of forces could unlock transformations once thought impossible. And if that's true, then how much of our reality is simply habit? The Hutchison effect may never be fully explained, but in a world increasingly certain of its boundaries, it reminds us of something essential, that the edges of knowledge are never smooth. They shimmer, they distort, and sometimes, if only briefly, they lift. A box, wood and steel, no wires, no hum, just stillness. To some, it looked like a coffin. To others, a portal. In the 1940s, psychiatrist Wilhelm Reich built what he called an orgone accumulator, a device meant to collect a form of energy he believed permeated all living things. He called it orgone, a life force, a subtle current that connected biology, weather, and emotion. It sounded strange, but Reich had reason to believe. Originally a student of Freud, Reich had long been fascinated by the energy of the human body, not just metaphorically, but physically. He theorized that emotional and physical health were tied to the flow of this invisible energy. Block it, and illness appeared. Restore it, and healing began. The accumulator was his tool. Constructed of alternating layers of organic and metallic materials, it acted like a passive pump, drawing in orgone from the surrounding environment and concentrating it inside. Patients would sit within the box for sessions. Some reported reduced pain, faster recovery, even remission from chronic conditions. Reich didn't stop there. He built larger devices, cloudbusters, that used similar principles to manipulate atmospheric orgone. With them, he claimed to induce rainfall, break droughts, and shift weather patterns across miles. To his followers, Reich was a visionary. To authorities, he was something else. By the early 1950s, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration began investigating his work. They labeled orgone a hoax, a violation of medical law. Courts banned the distribution of his devices. Then came the raids. In 1956, federal agents seized and destroyed Reich's equipment, research papers, and thousands of his books. They incinerated his published work, one of the few instances of government-sanctioned book burning in American history. Reich was imprisoned for contempt of court. He died the following year in a Pennsylvania prison cell. Officially, he was discredited, his energy dismissed as fantasy. Yet decades later, the shadow of orgone lingers. Independent researchers continue to experiment with Reich's designs. Gardeners report improved plant growth near orgone devices. Alternative health practitioners speak of subtle temperature changes, mood shifts, and bioelectric patterns. Most of it remains anecdotal, unverified, unexplained. But the deeper question is not about the science. It's about what Reich dared to suggest, that life is suffused with energy beyond what we measure, that emotion, weather, and health are part of one continuum, that the body is not a machine, but a field. What would it mean if healing required not intervention, but alignment? Reich's life became a cautionary tale, a warning about stepping beyond accepted boundaries. Yet his work continues to spark curiosity, if only in whispers. And maybe that's the essence of orgone, something quiet, persistent, difficult to see, but impossible to fully erase. A current that still flows whether we believe in it or not. The stones do not lie. In Homestead, Florida, a fortress of coral blocks stands silent beneath the sun. Some weigh 30 tons. Others are carved into perfect shapes, arches, circles, balancing gates that pivot with the touch of a finger. Together, they form Coral Castle, a monument built not by a crew, not by machines, but by one man, Edward Leedskalnin. Between 1923 and 1951, Leedskalnin worked mostly at night, alone, behind walls. He claimed no engineering background, no special tools. And yet, he moved and shaped more than 100 tons of coral rock, constructing a complex that still puzzles engineers to this day. How did he do it? Became the question that echoed after his death. Leedskalnin offered only cryptic explanations. He spoke of magnetic currents, of secrets known to the ancient Egyptians. He hinted that gravity could be manipulated, that the true nature of magnetism had been overlooked by modern science. Visitors occasionally glimpsed him at work. They described giant stones floating silently, suspended in air, shifting as if weightless. But no one saw the mechanism. No crane, no pulley, just motion, precise, effortless, and uncanny. After his death in 1951, authorities sealed his workshop. Inside, they found hand-built tools, strange electrical devices, magnets, coils, nothing that could account for the feat of moving blocks heavier than a locomotive engine. And yet, there the stones remain. Coral Castle is not just a curiosity. It's a question carved in rock, a challenge to our understanding of force, weight, and work. Leedskalnin left behind a series of booklets, dense with personal philosophy and unconventional physics. He claimed to have uncovered the true nature of magnetic interaction, something deeper than polarity, something tied to resonance, balance, and alignment. Modern builders have tried to replicate his work using contemporary equipment. Cranes struggle. Teams of workers require days to shift what he moved in hours alone. So was it anti-gravity, magnetic levitation, or simply a forgotten technique of leverage and timing, mastered to perfection? No one knows. What is clear is this. Leedskalnin tapped into something, whether physical or philosophical, that allowed him to move the immovable, and he guarded it closely, perhaps knowing that some truths, once revealed, cannot be unseen. Today, Coral Castle stands open to the public. Tourists walk its quiet paths. They marvel, they guess, they pose for pictures, but the secret remains embedded in the stones. Maybe the real monument isn't the castle itself, but the idea that there are still mysteries left in the world, that not everything has been mapped, that the age of wonder didn't end with satellites and algorithms, and that sometimes the greatest builders are those who work unseen, lifting more than just weight and leaving behind more than just stone. It begins with a ring and a hum. In 1960s England, an unassuming electrical engineer named John Searle claimed to have built something extraordinary, a generator that not only produced unlimited clean energy, but lifted itself into the air. He called it the SEG, the Searle effect generator. Its design was deceptively simple: concentric magnetic rings lined with spinning magnetic rollers arranged in perfect symmetry. As the rollers orbited, they created not just electricity, but a field, one that reduced weight, resisted gravity, and in some tests, lifted the entire machine skyward. Searle insisted he didn't invent the idea. He discovered it in a dream. As a teenager, he began experimenting with magnetics, using scrap parts. He noticed unusual behavior, objects spontaneously moving, electrical surges with no power source. Over time, he refined the design. By his 20s, he was demonstrating levitation. The device required no fuel, no combustion. Once started, it powered itself. Witnesses saw it light bulbs, run appliances, then rise silently into the air. It was, by every measure, impossible. British authorities responded with suspicion. In 1968, officials raided Searle's lab, citing interference with aviation radar systems. His equipment was seized. He was imprisoned for energy violations and accused of operating illegal generators. While in prison, all of his prototypes and notes were destroyed. The official story faded into obscurity, but some engineers who had worked with Searle continued quietly. They spoke of anti-gravity fields, of strange cold zones surrounding the generator, of electrical output far exceeding what input could explain. They described levitation that resisted wind and gravity alike, and a glow, pink, violet, surrounding the spinning magnets at peak operation. Replicating the SEG has proven elusive. Those who've tried report baffling results: magnetic anomalies, partial levitation, sudden equipment failures. Some claim success, but without mainstream validation, their findings remain in the shadows. Why would such a device be suppressed? Because if real, the implications are staggering. A machine that generates power from magnetism alone could end reliance on fossil fuels overnight. A generator that lifts itself could render jet engines, rockets, and roads obsolete. It would collapse entire industries: transportation, energy, logistics, while redistributing power on a global scale. Too much, too fast, too uncontrolled. Searle never stopped. Even after prison, he continued building, teaching, warning. He believed his technology could change the world, but only if humanity was ready to use it wisely. That readiness never came. Today, the SEG exists only in fragments, drawings, photographs, fading memories. But the idea persists, circulating in forums, laboratories, and minds that still dream of machines that defy both gravity and limitation. Was it science? Was it illusion? Or was it something else entirely? A glimpse of what might be possible when we stop asking, "What is allowed?" and begin asking, "What is true?" Searle's machine may never fly again, but the thought of it, silent, spinning, rising, continues to orbit just beyond reach, a vortex in reverse. Not destruction, but creation. In the forests of Austria during the 1940s, an inventor named Victor Schauberger studied water, not in pipes or pumps, but in rivers, streams, eddies. He watched how it curled, spun, carved rock with grace instead of force. He believed nature moved through implosion, not explosion, and he built engines to prove it. Schauberger's machines didn't burn. They spiraled. His implosion engines generated power by mimicking natural flow patterns. Water and air moved through carefully shaped turbines, forming inward-moving vortexes. These spirals compressed energy, creating motion, pressure, and even levitation. The machines ran cool, silent, clean. He called them repulsions. Witnesses described discs that hovered, spun, even rose. His engines seemed to generate lift without heat or combustion, violating the basic assumptions of propulsion. They moved more efficiently the longer they ran, drawing power from the very medium they shaped. The Nazi regime took notice. Schauberger was forced to work on advanced aircraft projects during World War II. His designs contributed to prototypes for disc-shaped craft, vehicles that reportedly demonstrated maneuverability far beyond traditional planes. He cooperated under duress, and when the war ended, American intelligence seized his research. Schauberger was brought to the US, interviewed, and then silenced. His papers disappeared into military archives. His patents stalled. He was bound by legal agreements that left him unable to continue independent work. Shortly after returning to Austria in 1958, he died, exhausted, disillusioned, broken. The promise of implosion vanished with him. Why would an engine that mimicked the elegance of rivers be suppressed? Perhaps because it challenged everything, not just how we generate energy, but how we think about force. Our machines explode. They destroy to move. Schauberger's machines curved and cooled, using natural motion to generate clean, almost sacred power. He believed that energy should not be violent, that technology should align with nature, not fight it. Modern researchers exploring vortex dynamics have validated parts of his work. Some turbines now incorporate spiraling flows for increased efficiency. Water purification systems echo his principles. But the full scope of his implosion engines remains locked behind a wall of skepticism and missing documents. What if motion doesn't need fuel? What if propulsion can be peaceful? And what does it say about our civilization that we chose combustion over coherence? Schauberger once said, "Understand nature, then copy nature." His engines were not just machines. They were philosophies made mechanical. Spirals instead of pistons. Flow instead of fire. And somewhere, deep in a forested memory, the water still spins, quietly revealing a different kind of power. A ship disappears, not over the horizon, but into the air itself. The year is 1943. The place, the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The ship, USS Eldridge, a destroyer escort, fitted with experimental equipment under a veil of wartime secrecy. The goal? Radar invisibility. The method? Electromagnetic manipulation, based loosely, some say wildly, on Einstein's unified field theory. But what happened was not camouflage. According to witnesses, on October the 28th, 1943, the ship didn't just vanish from radar. It vanished, visibly, physically, from the dock. A greenish-blue haze enveloped it, then nothing. Moments later, it reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia, over 200 miles away, before returning just as abruptly to Philadelphia. Teleportation, dimensional shift. Something more? The accounts vary. Some speak of blinding light, others of silence and dread. Sailors were said to emerge disoriented, some fused into the ship's metal, others lost in time, unable to re-enter the world at the right pace. Some never returned to themselves at all. The U.S. Navy denies the event ever happened. No logs, no records, no survivors on record. But whispers continued, through veterans' stories, private letters, fringe research. And a man named Dr. Morris Jessup, who investigated the claims, was found dead under suspicious circumstances before he could publish his findings. If true, the Philadelphia experiment represents a moment when technology breached reality itself, not incrementally but violently. Not all teleportation is smooth. The alleged mechanism involved massive Tesla coils, magnetic field generators, and synchronized pulses meant to bend space-time. Essentially, to wrap the ship in a bubble that could slip out of physical space and reappear elsewhere. It wasn't just about travel. It was about erasing presence, about stepping outside the map. And if it worked, even partially, it changes everything. Distance becomes meaningless. Walls become optional. The very idea of containment, of territory, of security is undone. But at what cost? If human minds and bodies cannot withstand the stress of reality manipulation, then the technology is both miracle and curse. It opens a door, but may never allow safe passage. Since then, nothing official has emerged. No repeat experiments, no public confirmations. But traces of the idea have trickled through defense research, rumors of quantum tunneling, exotic propulsion, non-local communication, possibilities suspended between physics and mythology. The Philadelphia experiment reminds us that the edge of understanding is not a line, it's a field, and sometimes stepping into it brings more than knowledge. It brings consequences. What if the future isn't just about what we build, but about what we choose not to open? Some doors, once unlocked, may not be shut again. And some journeys, once taken, do not lead back to where we began. In a quiet university office, papers are filed, lights shut off, and a cure disappears. It's 1934, Los Angeles. A group of scientists, surgeons, researchers, physicians gather in a modest lab. Before them lies a device, emitting controlled electromagnetic pulses tuned to precise frequencies. Nearby, terminal cancer patients rest in chairs, thin with illness, waiting without hope. But over the next 70 days, something happens. Their tumors shrink. Pain fades. 14 out of 16 are declared cured. The remaining 2 recover shortly after. No radiation, no surgery, no side effects. Just carefully modulated frequency, like music played into the body's deepest structures. The man behind this experiment is Dr. Royal Raymond Rife. It should have been a turning point in medical history, but the announcement never came. The lead physician overseeing the trial, Dr. Milbank Johnson, dies suddenly, days before the results are to be published. His notes vanish. The lab is shuttered. And Rife, once on the verge of a Nobel nomination, finds himself under attack. Medical journals refuse to publish his work. Doctors using his machines are threatened with loss of license. His equipment is seized. His name is smeared. The message is clear. This technology is not welcome. Why? Rife's approach was elegant and inexpensive. A single device could be calibrated to treat hundreds of illnesses by identifying and destroying pathogens via their vibrational signature. No prescriptions, no recurring treatments, no pharmaceutical pipeline. To an industry already thriving on chronic care, this was disruption, not progress. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, Rife fought in court, in labs, and eventually in poverty. Others who supported his work died mysteriously. One was found dead in his lab, another just before testifying. The pattern wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Today, remnants of Rife's ideas survive in the fringes: frequency-based wellness devices, light therapy systems, alternative clinics. Some are quackery, others hint at something deeper. But none have recaptured the results of 1934. What remains is a question whispered in oncology wards and research circles alike. What if the cure wasn't lost, but buried? And if so, how many have suffered not from the absence of a solution, but from the refusal to let it exist? Rife once said that every disease has a frequency, and if you can find it, you can neutralize it. Like a glass shattered by the right note. But the note was silenced. And what echoes now is not just the science, but the silence that followed it. A silence that still costs lives every single day. In a dusty corner of history, a machine once stood that promised something unthinkable: to unmake gravity itself. Its creator was a man both brilliant and obscure, Thomas Townsend Brown. Decades before spaceflight became routine, Brown believed that gravity was not a constant, but a field, one that could be shaped, bent, perhaps even cancelled. His tool? The humble capacitor. Brown discovered that when he applied a high voltage across a specially shaped capacitor, the device moved. Not from vibration or heat, but from some invisible directional force. He refined it, shaped it into disks, powered it with more voltage, and watched it fly. By the early 1950s, he was demonstrating these saucer-like crafts to US military officials. The disks hovered, maneuvered, accelerated without jet or propeller. They flew silently, defying every known principle of aviation. The Air Force took notice. Soon after, Brown's research was absorbed into a series of classified projects. He was told not to speak publicly. His patents were quietly restricted. Funding shifted into black-budget programs. Officially, the research was deemed a failure. But some weren't convinced. Aviation journalists hinted at hidden programs, Leaked memos referred to electrogravitic propulsion. Major aerospace firms were found to be researching similar technologies, quietly, deeply. Meanwhile, Brown faded into obscurity. He died in 1985, still bound by non-disclosure agreements. No recognition, no disclosure, just silence. Why suppress a technology that could revolutionize transportation? Because it doesn't just offer faster planes, it offers something bigger. A craft that uses no fuel, makes no noise, and defies inertia changes not only the skies, it changes geopolitics. Borders become porous, missile shields irrelevant, space reachable by backyard inventors, energy infrastructure obsolete. It was too much freedom, too soon. Today, anti-gravity is relegated to science fiction. But the principles Brown explored, electrostatics, field manipulation, inertial damping, are once again gaining attention in theoretical physics. NASA has quietly studied similar propulsion systems. Defense departments toy with exotic technologies, yet no official acknowledgement connects them to Brown. What if his discovery wasn't false, but premature? What if the greatest breakthrough of the 20th century happened in secret and was buried beneath layers of denial, not because it didn't work, but because it did? Brown's discs once circled small testing rooms under their own power, humming softly, silently challenging Newton. They may never circle our skies, but somewhere in the vaults of suppressed potential, the blueprint for a different world still waits. A world where gravity is not a prison, but a puzzle, and flight is not a privilege, but a principle. The light dims, the music fades, and we are left with a question. What do these stories of vanished machines, forgotten inventors, and silenced breakthroughs really tell us? Not just about science, about us. From Tesla's tower to Brown's flying discs, from Rife's healing frequencies to Schauberger's spirals of energy, a pattern emerges, not of conspiracy, but of contradiction. Progress, it turns out, is not always linear. Sometimes it doubles back. Sometimes it's pushed off course. And sometimes it's hidden. We like to think of knowledge as cumulative, but history shows us something messier. Technologies are not always accepted because they work. Often they're accepted because they fit into markets, into systems, into beliefs we've already agreed upon. What happens when an invention doesn't fit? What happens when it threatens not only industries, but assumptions? These erased inventions point to a deeper truth, that human progress is not just driven by brilliance or discovery, but by permission, by timing, by power, and that the boundary between the possible and the impossible is not defined by nature, but by what we choose to see. This doesn't mean that every claim is true. Some were likely flawed, others exaggerated, but the consistent thread is how quickly the unconventional is discarded, not with rebuttal, but with silence. We are trained to forget, but forgetting comes at a cost. These lost ideas, some grounded in science, others in vision, offer not just what might have been, but what still might be. If energy can move without wires, if gravity can be bent, if the body can be healed with harmony, then our future could look radically different. Cleaner, quieter, kinder. The question is, would we allow it? There are always reasons not to believe. But belief is not the same as certainty. To believe is to hold space for wonder, for doubt, for the possibility that what we know today is only a fraction of what we might someday understand. In that spirit, this journey does not end with an answer, but with an invitation. To remember, to question, to listen more carefully to the stories that don't make it into textbooks, because somewhere, in a forgotten notebook, or a dusty archive, or the mind of someone too early for their time, there may be an idea waiting, an idea that could change everything. And this time, maybe we'll be ready. Because history is not just about what we've built, it's also about what we've buried. And the future may depend on what we're finally willing to unearth.